Inhabited since the 10th century, over time the city of Edinburgh has expanded in all directions, upwards, downwards, eventually spilling over its protective walls and into the world beyond. As you walk its labyrinthian medieval streets, you realise you are walking in the footsteps of people who lived centuries ago. Some of their stories permeate the very walls around you. You might, one night, find yourself wandering the closes of the Royal Mile. If you do, be sure to look behind you to listen for the sounds of someone, something, following you into the dark. Because one of Edinburgh's ghosts haunted these very places. To tell you this story, I need to take you back to the year 1688. We're in a courtroom and we're watching a divorce trial. And it should be very straightforward because husband and wife despise each other. On one side we have John Cheesley, man about town, absolute party animal, and very generous with it too. If you were in the pub with John Cheesley, he'd buy you drinks all night. And if you were a lady that he'd set his eye on, he would shower you with gifts. But this famous generosity ended the moment he stepped foot into his own home, where he was faced with his long-suffering wife, Margaret Nicholson. Now, Margaret Nicholson was sick to death of having to beg her husband for money to feed and clothe their 11 children. So at this point, she thinks she's better off without the man. He just wants to get back to the party. Here we are in court, and presiding over the case is the very upstanding Right Honourable Judge Sir George Lockhart, Chief President of the Court of Session in Scotland. And if that word salad means nothing to you, all you need to know is that he was a very big deal. Now, Sir George grants the couple their divorce, and as you might imagine, he orders John Cheesley to pay alimony, £75 per year for the upkeep of his family. Well, this apparently was a huge shock to John, who flew into a rage in the courtroom. He even approached the judge and said, "You've not heard the last of me. I'll get my own back on you." And if you didn't quite catch that, you get the gist. So, of course, John Cheesley was very quickly removed from the courtroom, and Sir George thought nothing more of it. But John Cheesley, well, he thought of nothing else. And over the next few weeks and months, he brooded, he ruminated, and he became obsessed with getting revenge on the man who he felt had ruined his life. And then, on Easter Sunday 1689, he stood in the entrance to one of those closes, just off the Royal Mile, waiting in the shadows, waiting for a glimpse of Sir George, who he knew was a very pious man and would be making his way to St Giles Cathedral for the Easter Sunday sermon. He spotted him, followed him at a distance through the crowd into the church. He made his way to the back of the congregation, and there he was pacing back and forth, but his eyes never left the back of Sir George's skull. And at first, Sir George couldn't help but feel like he was being watched. But then the sermon began, and he became immersed in the story of Christ's resurrection, and by the time he left the church, he was filled with a deep inner peace. He made his way down the Royal Mile, amongst the lights, the noise and the crowds, and then he turned off onto Old Bank Close, where he lived, closing the iron gate behind him. And as he began to walk towards his front door, he heard that gate open and close again. Now, that shouldn't have been a problem. Lots of people lived on his close, but something about it reminded him of earlier in the day. So he stopped and turned. "Who's there?" But nobody answered, and his eyes hadn't become adjusted to the darkness of the close yet, so he turned around and he kept walking. And then he heard footsteps start up behind him, and that's when he panicked. He broke into a run. So did the footsteps. He fumbled in his pocket for his keys. He got to his front door. The key was in the lock. Turning, when bang! He slumped down, dead, to the ground. And who should come swaggering out of the shadows but John Cheesley himself, the pistol still smoking in his hand. And as people gathered to see what all the commotion was, Cheesley didn't run or hide. No, he started bragging openly to anyone who would listen. All of those months of obsession had turned the man quite insane, and now that he had got his revenge, well, he felt triumphant. Why shouldn't he boast? Well, as you can imagine, he was very quickly arrested, tried, and found guilty of the murder of Sir George Lockhart. But because he'd killed a judge, such an important man, just hanging wouldn't be enough. No, they had to make an example of him. So they broke both of his legs. They strung that pistol tightly around his neck, and they cut off his arm at the elbow. And when he went up to the gallows to be hanged, he realised they'd stuck that arm on a spike right in front of him. So the last thing he saw as the life drained out of his eyes was his own hand waving at him, beckoning him into death. And when he was dead, they hung his body up in chains to rot. But just a few days later, it disappeared. And that's when the stories began. People would say they'd be walking down the Royal Mile, then they'd turn off onto some dark, secluded close, away from the lights and the safety of the crowd. And then they'd hear footsteps behind them, dragging, shuffling footsteps, but footsteps that were gaining on them nonetheless. And then the worst part, they would be filled head to toe with the strongest desire to turn around and look. Now, if they could resist that impulse, they would run, but many could not. Many of them turn around and be faced with the grisly spectre of John Cheesley, his broken legs underneath him giving him a strange posture, his stump of an arm dangling at his side. But worst of all was the look in his eyes, those eyes boring into yours, demanding that you know who he is and what he has done. Well, Johnny One Arm, as they called him, haunted Edinburgh in this way for over 100 years. And then, in 1820, some workmen were renovating a cottage, and when they dug up the hearthstone, they found a skeleton buried underneath. Both of its legs were broken. The rusted remains of a pistol were strung around its neck, and yes, that left forearm was missing. Seems that the remains of John Cheesley had finally been found. His body was buried in consecrated ground, and thereafter the hauntings stopped. But what I think, my theory is, he wasn't finally at peace for being buried in the right place. No, he was only at rest because he'd gotten that last little bit of recognition for what he'd done. But what about the stories buried underground? A hidden underworld lies beneath the streets of Edinburgh. These are the Blair Street Underground Vaults. Situated under the South Bridge, this series of corridors and chambers are the deepest and most extensive set of vaults in the city, and they are considered one of the most haunted places in the United Kingdom. This is the Cobbler's room. When this room was first rediscovered in the 1980s, scraps of leather, tools, and even half-made shoes were found on the floor. But that's not the only reason we believe this to have been a cobbler's workshop. You see, every once in a while someone walks into this room and sees a figure sitting in the corner. The description is always the same. A bald man in his 50s, wearing a leather apron, busily working away on a pair of shoes. But most importantly, they say that he looks up and smiles at people as they walk into the room. He welcomes them into the space. So we think that, unlike other more hostile entities encountered within these vaults, the cobbler is a friendly spirit. It's believed the cobbler would have rented this underground workshop around the late 18th or early 19th century. Why does his spirit haunt this place? Perhaps he died in the vaults, or his spirit returned to the place where he was most at peace. He certainly seems interested in the living, or more specifically, their footwear. Visitors often describe the sensation of their trouser leg being lifted, as if someone is inspecting their shoes. However, visitors finding their shoelaces have suddenly come undone in this room should look to another, more mischievous ghost to blame. I'm sorry to say there is no shortage of child ghosts present in the vaults, but Jack is different. With his beautifully brushed golden curls and smart light blue velvet suit, the apparition of Jack is in stark contrast to the ragged children who were forced to live down in the vaults in the 1800s. How did he get here? It's believed that Jack was one day up above on the street bouncing a rubber ball when that ball bounced away from him, down into the vaults. Jack chased it down, and then he never found his way out. And now he is trapped down here, in the dark, alone, forever. Perhaps that's why he enjoys company so much. He seems always to be drawn to those he feels will take care of him. Parental figures, of course, but also teachers, nurses, those in caring professions. Most of all, Jack loves when other children are brought down into the vaults because, like all children, he wants to play. So when visitors report feeling a playful tug on the back of their coats, we know Jack is around. Some even say they feel a cold, smooth little hand slip into theirs, and in such cases we ask them not to pull their hand away. It's just Jack, looking for a companion, even if only for a short while. These are just some of the tales of Edinburgh's past. Wandering the streets, you might turn a corner and discover that a spirit has decided to reveal itself to you. Knowingly or not, we follow their invisible footsteps through the city, in closes, behind walls, underground. They live on in our stories, and perhaps they are just that, stories. But even the most fantastical tale holds some semblance of truth.